This is my 128th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge, and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part is a rolling stock kit build of Parkside Dundas kit PC49 for an LMS 20-ton brake van, ex-Midland style with duckets. I just checked and it seems this kit is still sold by Peco under the same product number PC49. This part is a continuation of my dealings with the things that I brought back from the Great British Train Show in Brampton, Ontario, Canada at the end of April. I came back from that show with a number of rolling stock kits, and when I inspected them more closely, this one appeared the most immediately interesting. I didn't go to the show with any intention of buying wagon kits, but a vendor had a box full of kits and they were virtually giving them away, $1 each, except for the Peco wonderful wagon kits, for which they were asking $4. I picked out a couple that fit my prototype of pre-World War II LMS operations, including this Parkside Dundas kit. Then the vendor ended up thrusting a couple more kits on me as they didn't have change, which I was okay with. This kit wasn't in its original packaging, although most of those on offer were. This one came to me in a Ziploc bag, although it says $7 on it. As I say, I only paid $1 for the kit. Since the kit was just in a bag, I was a bit concerned as to whether the parts would all be there, not that at $1 it would be a great loss if they weren't. I was surprised when I looked more closely to see that this kit had been started. Someone had got as far as assembling the basic body and had painted and decaled the body. I'm not sure if the decals used came with the kit or not. I've had very mixed results with respect to the adequacy of decals supplied with Parkside and Peco kits. Sometimes they say includes decals, but they don't come with very complete decals, but perhaps sometimes they do. It seemed that all of the kit parts were there, except that the kit was supplied with some wire for making handrails, and that was missing. The clear acetate for glazing windows had already been fitted to the windows. Here's the instruction sheet for the kit, which was fortunately included. It was only printed on one side, so that's all of it. Instruction 4 starts with insert the brass bearing cups into the axle box holes. At first I thought this indicated something else that was missing, as I didn't see any brass bearings, although I think I have some in my spares box. Anyway, I didn't need to look in my spares box, as it turned out that the brass bearings had already been inserted into the axle boxes. None of the parts on the black sprues had actually been separated, so it seemed that whoever had been working on the kit had given up after the start of Instruction 4. Actually, the fixing of the partitions into the body came before Instruction 4, but that hadn't been done, although the partitions had already been painted and glazed. So I started by fixing the partitions into place at either end, butting up against the locating ridges. The sides of the body were tending to warp a bit. Gluing in the partitions forced the sides out, making them more straight. You can see that the ducket windows have also been glazed, as well as those in the partitions. The next operation, as per the instructions, was to glue the sole bars in place and get the wheels with their axles pivoted between the bearings in the axle boxes. I did this fairly quickly as a continuous operation, as I wanted to get the wheels nicely pivoted between the axle boxes before the glue holding the sole bars in place had time to fully set. This worked well. The wheels appeared to be of good quality and pivoted in the bearings very nicely. Next to be fitted were the brake arms and brake shoes. These came as 4 parts, one set for each wheel. I inspected the parts closely and found that they did have distinct inner and outer surfaces. The 2 at top show the outer surface with detailing, the 2 at bottom show the flat inner surface. Getting these parts glued in place around the wheels was rather fiddly. They need to be fixed close to the wheels so that they look credible as brakes, but if they actually touch the wheels at all, that will impede good running, so that needs to be avoided. Next to be fitted were buffer beam details, coupling hooks and buffer ends. The coupling hooks fitted very loosely into the holes in the buffer bars and so were hard to keep straight. The buffer ends, on the other hand, wouldn't go into the holes provided for them at all. The pins on them were too big for the holes. I measured one of the pins with my calipers and it came out as 1.6mm, as you can see here. Then I used a 1.6mm drill to open out the holes in the buffers, which did involve making them substantially larger. With that done, I fixed the buffer ends in place. Sorry, my camera decided to focus on the mat rather than the buffers here. These are the parts for the brake operating mechanism. The central operating lever part needs to be fixed between the two outer bracket parts, with the pins in the lever part going into holes in the bracket parts. This was very fiddly to do, hard to get the parts lined up, get the pins into the holes, and keep the bottoms of the brackets apart, which I'm doing here with the tips of my tweezers while the gluing sets. Once that assembly was set, it glued into place in the centre of the underside of the wagon. A point about that, the instructions said that the roof should be put on so that the chimney was on the opposite side to the brake assembly fitting. But the brake assembly fitting was in the middle, so there was no opposite side. Was it a mistake that the brake assembly fitting was in the middle? Or were the instructions just wrong? These parts were actually mentioned in the same instruction as the buffer beam details, but I missed doing them. They're covers for the axle boxes. I'm not quite sure why these were made as separate parts. They're not very detailed, and you'd have thought that limited detail could just have been moulded directly onto the axle boxes. Anyway, I did my best to stick the covers neatly in place. The instructions were unclear as to which way up they were supposed to go. It seemed to me that the dots and ears should go at the top. To put the axle box covers on the other side, I stood the wagon on a card wedge from Metcalf assembly that I had on the bench to avoid dislocating the details on the lower side. These are the parts for the main footboard on one side, the long footboard itself and 4 mounting brackets. I had a heck of a time with these, making more than one mistake in their assembly. The instructions were not at all clear, although they did make it clear that the brackets with the T ends, as opposed to the ones with 2 L's, were supposed to go on the outside. What wasn't clear was why those brackets should go on the outside and which ends of the brackets were supposed to attach to the footboard. I started out gluing the brackets on like this. I attached the ends that protruded slightly beyond the cross pieces to the footboard, as that seemed to provide a more positive fit. However, I really should have known better than to put the brackets on this way round. I attached all 8 brackets before realizing that I had them on the wrong way. With the brackets on this way, when the brackets were attached to the sole bar, the flange on the footboard would have come on the bottom. But the flange is supposed to be on the top, at the back. So I had to take all 8 brackets off and put them back on the right way round. Fortunately, I realized my mistake before the glue had time to set. Here are the 2 footboards with the brackets on the right way round. Well, nearly. With the footboards themselves the right way up, the brackets are now sticking up from the back, which is how they need to be. However, it turned out that I'd attached the wrong ends of the brackets to the footboard. They were actually supposed to be attached by the other ends. I let the glue on the brackets set thoroughly for hours before attempting to mount the footboards under the sole bars, and it was only after this that I realized I had the brackets on upside down. It didn't really make a lot of difference as regards attaching the boards under the sole bars, but the extra bracket bars that I have pointing in from the ends of my boards were actually supposed to be at the top, pointing out from the sole bar to help support the small footboards. Here are the parts for the small footboards, which go at each end of the van, basically as mounting steps. If I had put the brackets on the right way up, those little bars that I have pointing in from the ends of the long footboards would have pointed out from the sole bars, going under the short footboards to provide support. As it was too late for me to take things apart and put them together again correctly, since the brackets were completely fixed in place. So I just glued the small footboards in place without the supporting bars underneath. It wasn't actually too difficult to get them to stay in place, with glue on their fixing tabs and on their edges where they met the sole bars. I put the roof on at this point. As noted, the instructions regarding which side the chimney should go on made no sense, since they said it should be on the opposite side to the brake operating mechanism, which was actually exactly in the middle. The kit didn't come with couplings. I don't think it would have come with couplings even originally, although I can't be entirely sure since it came to me opened, but I seem to remember building similar Parkside kits before and they didn't include couplings. The kit did include coupling mounting blocks on the black part sprues. Here you can see those coupling mounting blocks in place behind the buffer beams at either end. Those coupling blocks work with the kind of couplings that have mounting bars with holes at either end. These are Bachmann wide loop couplings, of which I had plenty on hand, as they're what I generally use if I can, where I need to add couplings to rolling stock. These fit quite nicely on the Parkside Peco style of mounting block. And here is the bottom of the van with those couplings in place. So here's the van with the basic assembly complete and couplings added. The kit was supposed to come with wire, which the instructions suggested could be cut to length, bent and fitted through holes in the van's sides to make handrails. The wire didn't come to me with the kit parts, but even if it had, I'm not sure that I would have tried to use it as the instructions indicated. I find it hard to imagine how I would have been able to create satisfactory handrails that way. But the van did look very incomplete without any handrails, so I did my best to create something using some 20 thou styrene rod that I had on hand. At least the styrene rod was the right colour, as the rails on these vans were generally painted white. I don't quite know how colour could have been managed working with the wire. It was rather hard to attach the rod. I just glued it in place with small dabs of glue at either end, but it was tricky to get the rails straight and some glue marks were pretty inevitable. I decided that I would finish off by giving the van a coat of clear matte fixative. I would probably have done this anyway to protect the decals, but I figured it would also help to tone down the glue marks from attaching the handrails. I masked the lower area to avoid spraying fixative onto the wheels and axles. Here's the van back to the bench after the fixative spray had time to dry. The handrails aren't the best, but hopefully they'll pass muster from a distance. Finally, here's the van on the tracks behind a train. I'm not going to include running video here. In my next part I'll deal with the Black 5 Loco I got at the April show and with the Hornby Doublo and Wren wagons that I got, and then I'll do some running video of the whole lot running together as a train.